call came on a Thursday evening, just after 6. I remember because the hockey game had just started, and I'd been looking forward to it all week. I wasn't expecting anyone to call. My daughter, Simone, had told me she'd be busy with rehearsal preparations all week, so when my phone buzzed on the side table and I saw an unfamiliar number, I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick it up. "Is this Edwin?" The voice was smooth, confident, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who's used to being listened to. "It is," I said. "This is Theo, Simone's fiancé." I sat up straighter. I'd met Theo twice. Once at a dinner in downtown Toronto. He'd spent most of the evening talking about himself, and once at a brief lunch at a place in Yorkville where the sandwiches cost $22 and came with a sprig of rosemary on the plate. Both times, he'd shaken my hand with that particular grip that men use when they want to remind you who's in control of the room. "Theo," I said, "what can I do for you?" There was a pause. A deliberate one. The kind you use when you're about to say something and you want the other person to understand it's final. "We've been going over the rehearsal dinner guest list," he said. "And I want to be straightforward with you, Edwin, because I think that's the respectful thing to do." I waited. The dinner tomorrow is really intended for close family and our immediate circle. People who are, involved in the business side of things. Clients, partners, a few investors. You understand, it's not really the right environment for. He paused again, "for everyone." I was quiet for a moment. The hockey game played on in the background. Someone had just scored, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. "I see," I said. "Simone agrees," he added quickly. "We just think it would be better if you joined us at the ceremony directly. You'll still walk her down the aisle, of course. That's important to us." Important to us. Like it was a checkbox. "Of course," I said. "Thank you for letting me know, Theo." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time after that. Not angry. Not exactly. More like that hollow feeling you get when something you suspected turns out to be true. The hockey game went to a second period. I didn't watch it. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. Red Rose, the same brand my wife, Lorraine, used to buy every week from the Loblaws on King Street. And I stood at the window looking out at the backyard. Lorraine had planted a row of cedar hedges along the back fence before she passed. 12 years ago now. They'd grown tall enough to block the neighbor's garage. She'd have liked that. I thought about Simone. She was 31. She'd met Theo 2 years ago at a fundraiser in the financial district. He ran a wealth management firm, small but growing from what I understood. Ambitious young man, the kind who wears a watch that costs more than most people's cars and thinks that's a personality. I thought about the phone call. Not the words exactly. The intention behind them. I decided I would go to the rehearsal dinner anyway. I should tell you something about myself. I'm 64 years old. I live in the same house in Mississauga I bought with Lorraine 37 years ago. It needs a new roof. I know that. The driveway has a crack running through it that I keep meaning to patch. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with 180,000 kilometers on it. The passenger side mirror has been duct taped since 2021, when I clipped a concrete pillar in a parkade downtown. On the outside, I look exactly like what most people assume I am, a retired working man with a modest house and a truck that's seen better days. That's the thing about assumptions. People make them so quickly, and they hold on to them so tightly, that they never stop to ask a single question. What Theo didn't know, what Simone had ever paid much attention to, was that 31 years ago, a friend of mine named Desmond and I started a small logistics company out of a rented office in Brampton. 2 desks, 1 ancient photocopier. We hauled freight mostly, construction materials, industrial equipment. We worked 16-hour days and drove ourselves to the job sites on weekends. By the time Simone was in high school, that company had contracts with 3 provincial governments and 2 of the largest grocery chains in the country. By the time Lorraine got sick, we had over 200 employees across 4 provinces. When Desmond retired 5 years ago, I bought out his shares. I am not a wealthy man in the way Theo would understand it. I don't have a penthouse or a jet. I still drive the F-150. I still eat breakfast at the same diner on Ontario, where coffee and 2 eggs cost $7 and the owner knows my name. But I own the building that Theo's firm rents 3 floors up. He didn't know that yet. The rehearsal dinner was at a hotel in the Distillery District, one of the newer boutique places. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, the kind of venue that Instagram built. I'd looked it up. The event space alone rented for $4,000 for the evening. And that was before catering. I drove the truck, parked it myself in the underground lot, took the elevator up, and walked into the lobby in my work jacket, the dark green one with the worn elbows, and a clean pair of jeans. The event coordinator at the door looked at me the way people look at a dog that's wandered into a restaurant. "Sir, are you here for the Whitfield-Hartley rehearsal dinner?" "I'm the father of the bride," I said. There was a pause while she checked her tablet, a very long pause. "I don't see your name on the—" "Edwin Hartley," I said. She looked up, then back down at the tablet. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartley. It looks like I'm not sure there's a seat assigned for you this evening. Let me find someone." She found the event manager, a young man named Patrick who was trying very hard to look like he wasn't flustered. He led me to a small alcove near the entrance and explained kindly, carefully, like he was reading from a script, that the dinner was at capacity and that unfortunately he couldn't seat additional guests without authorization from the event host. The event host being Theo. I thanked Patrick. I told him it wasn't his problem to solve. I could see he felt genuinely uncomfortable about the whole thing. I liked him for that. I walked back out through the lobby. The woman at the door avoided my eyes. I drove home. I made a sandwich. I watched the end of the hockey game. Toronto lost, which felt appropriate. And then I sat at the kitchen table and I made a list. The company that owned the building Theo rented had been managed quietly for years through a numbered corporation. I'd done that deliberately. Lorraine and I both liked our privacy, and after a certain point, when the business grew past a certain size, it became easier to operate that way. Most people I interacted with in my daily life had no idea who I was, professionally speaking. Theo had no idea. What Theo also didn't know was that 3 months earlier, he had submitted a proposal to expand his firm into 2 additional floors of the building. His office manager had sent the request to my property management company. The approval was pending my signature. I had been inclined to approve it. Now I sat at my kitchen table and thought carefully about what I actually wanted to do. I want to be honest about what went through my mind. I wasn't burning with rage. I wasn't plotting revenge in some theatrical sense. I was mostly just tired. Tired of being assessed and found wanting by a man who had never once asked me a single real question about my life. Tired of my daughter letting that happen. Tired of the particular kind of arrogance that assumes a man is only worth the clothes he's wearing. I thought about Lorraine. She would have had something to say about all of this. She always did. She'd probably tell me not to make any decisions until I'd slept on it. So I slept on it. In the morning, I called my lawyer. The wedding was 6 weeks out. There was a great deal still to arrange. Theo's family, his parents were from Vancouver, old money, the kind of people who owned a cottage on Bowen Island and called it modest, had contributed $20,000 to the wedding budget. Simone and Theo were covering another $40,000. The remaining $230,000 of the projected cost had been quietly anticipated to come from me. I say anticipated. That's the polite word. No one had asked me directly. It had simply been assumed. Simone had forwarded me invoices on 2 occasions and I had paid them without comment. I think everyone had taken that to mean the pipeline was open. I called my accountant on Friday morning and had the relevant transfers reversed. The deposits that hadn't yet been invoiced, the venue, the catering company, the florist, I addressed directly with the vendors. Politely, I explained there had been a change in the financial arrangements and that the payments they'd been expecting from my account would not be coming. I then wrote a personal check for a very modest amount, enough to cover a simple civil ceremony and a dinner for immediate family, and set it aside. I'd offer it when the time was right. Whether it was accepted was up to them. On Saturday, I denied Theo's expansion application. I want to be clear that I did not do any of this in anger. I did it calmly, over 2 days, while also doing my laundry and cleaning out the gutters and taking my neighbor's dog for a walk because her hip was giving her trouble. Life continued. It always does. Simone called me on Sunday. I'd been expecting it. "Dad," her voice was tight in the way it gets when she's trying to control something, "we need to talk." "Of course," I said. "Come for dinner. I'll make soup." She came along. Theo was not with her. which I took as a sign that she understood on some level this needed to be between the two of us. She sat at the same table she'd done homework at for 12 years. I put a bowl of split-pea soup in front of her and sat across from her and waited. The caterer called, Theo, she said, and the venue called. They said the deposits were reversed. That's right, I said. Dad, the wedding is in 6 weeks. I know. She looked at me for a long time, her mother's eyes. Dark brown, very direct. When she was small, she used to use that look to win arguments. It still worked, mostly. Why? She asked. I thought about giving her a long answer. I thought about explaining the phone call, the lobby, the event coordinator's tablet, the alcove with the event manager. I decided against it. Theo called me on Thursday, I said. He told me I wasn't welcome at the rehearsal dinner, that it was for important people. The silence that followed was the longest kind, the kind that has a lot of weight in it. Dad, she started. He used those words, I said. I'm not summarizing, I'm quoting. She put her spoon down. She didn't pick it up again. I didn't know he was going to say that, she said finally. I believe you, I said. And I did, mostly. But you knew I wasn't invited. She didn't answer that. Simone, I said carefully, I've been your father for 31 years. I drove you to hockey practice at 5:30 in the morning. I sat in every school auditorium in the city watching you perform in plays where you had 3 lines. I held your mother's hand when she was dying, and then I held yours. I've never once asked you to explain your life to me. I've just shown up. She was crying by then, quietly. She doesn't cry loudly, never did, even as a child. But I will not fund a wedding where I am considered an embarrassment, I said. I won't do that. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Very practical. Very Lorraine. What does that mean for us? She asked. It doesn't mean anything for us, I said. You're my daughter. That's not a transaction. But the wedding is a different matter. That's Theo's event, clearly. He can fund it. She left her on Nime. I don't think she was angry at me exactly. I think she was frightened. Not of losing the wedding. Or not only that. I think she was frightened of the conversation she'd have to have with Theo when she got home. I hope she had it. The next 2 weeks were complicated. Theo called me once. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that moved through several emotional registers. Confused, then conciliatory, then briefly indignant, then conciliatory again. He mentioned that he'd heard about the building and that there must have been some kind of miscommunication. He used the word miscommunication 4 times in a 3-minute message. I counted. I didn't call him back. Simone and I spoke twice. We talked about her mother's engagement ring, which Simone had asked about wearing. We talked about her cousin's daughter, who had just started walking. We did not talk about Theo, specifically. I understood that she was working through something and that she needed time. 3 weeks before the wedding, she came back to the house, this time with Theo. He looked like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say very carefully and then lost his notes on the way over. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and he spoke for about 10 minutes. It was a genuine apology, I think, or at least the most genuine one he was capable of producing. He said he had been under pressure. He said he hadn't thought about how it would feel. He said he should have called me to include me, not to exclude me. He said he'd been wrong. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I appreciate you saying that, Theo. I want my daughter to be happy, and I want to be present in her life, which means I need to be present in her marriage. If you want that too, then we can talk. If you want a business relationship, cordial, functional, separate, I can manage that too. But I need to know which one this actually is. There was a long pause. The first one, he said, quietly. I looked at Simone. She nodded. I pulled the check out of the kitchen drawer, the modest one. I set it on the table. This is what I'm contributing to the wedding, I said. It's enough for a ceremony and a dinner. If you want something larger, you'll need to fund it yourselves. That seems right to me. Theo looked at the check. I could see him calculating. I could see the moment he decided it wasn't the battle to fight. Okay, he said. The wedding was smaller than originally planned. The venue was a heritage hall in Hamilton, a beautiful old building built in 1912 with tall windows and original hardwood floors. Simone had found it herself after things fell apart with the Distillery District place. She said she liked it better. I believed her. There were 60 people. Simone's friends, our family, a handful of Theo's people. No investors. No clients. No seed round pitches over the dinner table. I walked her down the aisle. She had a wildflower bouquet, simple, a little unruly, very like her. She squeezed my arm at the entrance and didn't let go the whole way down. At the reception, Theo's father came and found me at the bar. He was a quiet man, about my age, in a plain navy suit. He shook my hand. My son needed someone to tell him no, he said simply. Most of us do, I said. We had a drink together. He told me about a fishing trip in Haida he'd taken years ago. I told him about the time Lorraine convinced me to go cross-country skiing in Algonquin in February, and I fell through a snowdrift and she laughed so hard she couldn't help me out for a full 2 minutes. He laughed at that. A real laugh. It was a good evening. I drove home in the F-150 with the duct-tape mirror. Took the QEW, which was quiet at that hour. The radio played an old Gordon Lightfoot song. The kind that sounds like Canadian winter, like something you'd hear in a Tim's parking lot at 7 a.m., with a medium double-double going cold in your hand. I thought about Lorraine the whole way home. I thought about how she would have loved the wildflowers. And I thought about something she used to say to me, back when the company was just getting started and we were exhausted and uncertain and half convinced we'd made a terrible mistake. Edwin, just do the next right thing and let everything else sort itself out. I'd done that, more or less. I pulled into the driveway of my house with the cracked pavement and the cedar hedges and the roof that still needed fixing. I sat in the truck for a moment. Then I went inside, made a cup of tea, and went to bed. I've been thinking about that Thursday evening a lot lately. Not with bitterness, I'm past that, but with the kind of quiet clarity that only comes when enough time has gone by and you can finally see the whole shape of something. Theo made a calculation that night. He looked at my truck, my jacket, my silence, and he decided I didn't belong in his world. And in a narrow sense, he was right. I don't belong in a world where a man's worth is measured by whether he can impress a table full of investors. I never wanted to. But here's what I've come to understand. The way we treat people when we think they can't hurt us, that's when we show exactly who we are. Not in the boardroom. Not at the fundraiser in the financial district. In the small moments. The phone call we make instead of the one we should, the name we leave off a list. Theo left my name off a list, and he thought nothing of it. That's the part that stays with me. Not the insult itself, but the ease of it. How little he had to think about it. I'm not a perfect man. I've made my share of decisions I'd take back, but I was raised to believe that how you conduct yourself, especially when no one's watching, especially when it costs you nothing to be decent, says everything. My father drove a delivery truck for 30 years. He never once treated a person as though their usefulness to him determined their dignity. That's not a complicated philosophy. It's just basic decency. And it has to be chosen every day, deliberately, or it disappears. What I did in those 2 days after the rehearsal dinner wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that. It was a boundary. There's a difference. Revenge wants the other person to suffer. A boundary just says, this is where I stand, and I won't move from it to make you comfortable. The hard part wasn't pulling the deposits or denying the expansion application. The hard part was the conversation with Simone at the kitchen table. Watching her face while I told her what her fiancé had said, that kind of hurt. The particular hurt of watching your child reckon with something they'd rather not see, that doesn't go away quickly. But she came back. She sat at that table, and she listened, and she had the courage to face it. That matters more to me than any of the rest of it. Intelligence without that kind of courage is just cleverness. Cleverness is easy. It takes something harder to sit across from your father and hear the truth about the man you're planning to marry and not flinch from it. She didn't flinch. I was proud of her for that. The wedding in Hamilton was small and real. 60 people who actually knew them. Wildflowers on the tables. Lorraine would have approved. I drove home on the QEW with Lightfoot on the radio and the duct-taped mirror catching the highway lights. And I thought, I did the next right thing. That's all any of us can really do. Not the grand gesture. Not the dramatic exit. Just the next right thing. With as much honesty and steadiness as we can manage. And then the one after that, the roof still needs fixing. I'll get to it in the spring.